Welcome. Today I would like to talk to you about a game which I played in the Belgian league against the German Grandmaster Daniel Fridman. The game was part of a match between our team of Eupen and the team of Wirtzfeld, where Wirtzfeld is, in terms of ratings, the strongest team in the Belgian league. Unfortunately, our team lost the match after a very big fight where I think we definitely had chances to either tie the match or maybe even win it, and in the end it was a little bit unfortunate that we were not able to get at least 1 point against Wirtzfeld. In terms of my opponent, Daniel Fridman is someone for whom I did not really prepare for this game, but whom I know since my childhood, because when I was playing the rapid tournaments in my childhood, he would always be the person who was the favorite to win the tournaments and most of the times also won the tournaments. So of course I have a lot of respect for his chess. I started the game with the move knight f3, and he played the Queen's Gambit declined with bishop to e7. I did not really prepare for this game, as I said. I was not really expecting Daniel, so I went for my standard stuff with bishop f4 and e3. And here he slightly surprised me with the move b6. c5 is one of the other topical moves, and knight bd7 is also playable. So played the move b6. And I went for bishop to d3, bishop a6, and c takes d. So I didn't really know this line, which he played now, namely knight takes d5. And after takes, queen takes, black is essentially sacrificing this pawn on c7. So here I started thinking, and I realized, okay, if I take the pawn, his idea is likely not rook c8, which is a move that I had seen in some other lines where black gives up this pawn. But probably just this queen a5 check seemed very, very unpleasant to me. The kind of obvious point is that I can't go queen d2 because of bishop b4. And so I would have to play something like knight d2. But then black gets a lot of counterplay after knight a6. Say bishop goes back, and something like knight b4, and already it's quite unpleasant to defend here. Maybe if I continue to keep my queen on this diagonal, queen a6 can come, rook ac8 can come, and it looks that black is taking over. And also the computer agrees that this is not what white should do. Thus, after some thinking, I decided not to take the pawn and to just go for castles, which is of course also a very logical move. Daniel kind of blitzed out this rook c8, which defends the pawn, but which looks kind of funny, right? I mean, black has 3 pieces here, which are all not really on the squares on which they want to be. The knight would already like to be developed to some place like f6, and especially this rook now seems kind of stupid, because this rook occupies the square c8, which typically should be the square where the a rook wants to go to. So I was kind of confident here that I should have an advantage. It turns out that things are not so easy, and that this is actually an idea of Etienne Bacrot, as Daniel told me after the game, and it's perfectly playable for black. So I went for e4, thinking I grab some space, and he went for this very strange looking move, queen to b7. So now he has all of his pieces here on these few squares. And I thought I'm ahead in terms of space, and he's also very cramped, so I thought this is kind of strange, I should be clearly better here. But then I started thinking, and I thought about playing like natural moves like rook ac1, rook fd1, and taking it from there. And I realized what his idea is. So suppose I now go for something like rook c1, he plays knight d7, rook d1, then he just wants to go knight f6 using this fianchettoed queen to attack the e4 pawn. And suddenly the position is everything but easy for white. Maybe white is even slightly worse already here, because it's really unpleasant to protect this pawn. He can go c5 at some point, and then it doesn't really matter that much that this rook is not yet on d8. And of course I don't want to play e5, as then knight d5 is grabbing a very important square. And if I go for something like bishop g5, he probably can just go h6, and after takes, if anyone is better, it's probably also black, because he has a bishop against this knight. So very deep strategical idea that looks quite strange at first sight. But then I thought, okay, if he is still lacking development, what I should do is I should open the position. And that's why I went for the move d5, which I think is also quite logical. And he just took and played knight to d7. And now it's a little bit a question of who strikes first, because if black gets the time to play knight f6 and rook d8, then my pawn on d5 is eventually going to fall. So I really have to avoid that. So I have to be quite quick here. Accordingly, I went for this move, rook fe1, hitting the e7 bishop. He attacked on b4, and now I played this somewhat strange looking move, rook e to d1. The point is, if I go rook e4, of course he has just knight to c5. So rook e d1. You might say, why didn't I play this immediately? Well, I think the bishop is actually worse on b4 than it would be on e7. So it has some logic to it. He agreed and now just went back to d6. And yeah, here I now started thinking a little bit. The point is, of course, structurally, this d4 pawn might get a weakness at some point. So it seems tempting to just take and allow him to take back. But I really didn't see any way of playing for an advantage here. So if he gets knight to c5, even if I get my knight to c6, I think it's absolutely nothing. And if I start with something like knight d4 to play for an immediate knight f5, then I think he can just take. And after something like takes, probably even has just something like rook c2 here hitting the pawn. And if anyone it's better, it's already black. So I was under some pressure, and yeah, I decided not to take on d6 with a kind of an equalish position, but I thought maybe after queen f5 I can play for some advantage. So he took on f4, and I now decided to take on d7. And it's a very, very interesting position in my view, because in the long run, black should be better. So if black manages, for instance, to get this bishop to f6, the bishop would dominate the knight. And if black then also manages to put the rooks on d6 and d8, then he can create a lot of pressure against his pawn and eventually win the pawn. However, these three pieces, the queen and the two rooks, they are not really protecting the king in any meaningful way. So I thought it's kind of dangerous for him because his king is so unprotected. I will go queen g4, I will go knight to f5, maybe I can swing a rook over and I can try to create an attack on the king. He went for the move h6, potentially giving the king some luft. Also in some lines after queen g4, what I want is I want to have a knight on g5, so this move also prevents this knight g5 stuff. He went back, and now it's really move by move. I started my attack with knight h4, threatening this knight f5. And he calmly just went back bishop to f8. So maybe in this position I should have gone for something else, something like rook ac1, keeping the tension a bit more, because the downside of this bishop f8 is of course that the bishop no longer protects c7. So maybe I should just have switched plans a little bit and go for something slower like rook ac1. What I did in the game was I played knight to f5, threatening to take this guy with a check, but he just protected h6 with a move g6. And after the game, Daniel told me objectively I should try the move h4. I'm not sure if this is correct. He was saying that after something like king h7, knight e3, he felt that this is quite dangerous for black. And indeed, the king is a little bit open. Maybe I can come with h5 and something like rook ac1. So maybe he's right here, that even though in the long run this bishop would be better than the knight, in this very concrete position, the queen is still out of play, the rooks are still out of play, so white should be better. But after h4, the computer gives just this h5 and rook e8, after which black is doing fine. So in that sense, not really a missed opportunity. yeah, so I also thought about kind of playing on here with some moves, but in the end I settled for this move d6, which kind of is equivalent to a draw offer, because he can now just take everything on d6 and then the game will peter out to a draw. I think it's not advisable for him to go for something crazy here to avoid the exchange of pawns. In some way, let's say maybe c5 or something, because then this passed pawn just becomes way too strong. I can protect it. I can play d7, and yeah, it's not clear how he can deal with that. So I think he had no choice but to take on d6, which is what happened in the game. But after knight d6, takes, the game now peters out. He played the move rook to d8. But yeah, maybe I should not take right now on d8, because then he's the first one to enter on the second rank, but I just went for this. And he played queen to e7. And after takes, I offered a draw, which he accepted. I mean, the point is, if he takes back, I can just go for something like g3. And after takes, we can shake hands. So, short game, but there were some very interesting concepts. For me, it was quite fascinating to see this concept of rook to c8 with queen to b7, which looks ridiculous at first glance, but which seems to be perfectly viable. And then later on, there was this strategic tension, who strikes first for some moves. So whether he's able to consolidate and then win the d5 pawn, or whether I'm able to get an attack. But yeah, in the end, by forcing things with d6, I traded down to a draw, which is a decent result against such a strong player, of course. And I was also quite low on time, so I was very reluctant to go for more with h4 here, based on the clock situation and also based a little bit on the opponent. So yeah, that's it for today, and see you next time.